But humans today, particularly, I think, sometimes need a bit more help to actually find our way into that imaginal world, which is the world of, that Henri Corbin so beautifully elucidated, which is the world. It's kind of the dancing ground of the world soul, the anima mundi of the ancient tradition. We need to find our ways in, and we don't always do it well. I certainly don't do it well by contemplation. It's not that I'm not a contemplative person, but
contemplation sounds so dry and dull.
Well, no, it's not. I think it can be incredibly beautiful, but I'm not. It's not my. It's not my superpower. Whereas if I can go into an active imagination process in the Jungian sense, or I can more actively take myself into a process of reverie or even dream work, although I'm not greatest at. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that depth psychology, particularly in the post-Jungian tradition, as well as active imagination, actively gives us a way into the imaginal world. And so it seems natural to me to bring the two together, that if these ancient philosophical traditions are telling us, as one of the more interesting Neoplatonists, Iamblichus, said, we need a bit of help to kind of find our way back to the one, to kind of understand who we are and the nature of our soul's journey. And we need to find our way back into the imaginal world, back into what he called, of course, the world of the world soul. And these practices help us do it. So that's what I'm trying to do at Nostos. I'm trying to bring in all of the myth, all of the archetypal work, all of the dream work, particularly all of the active imagination, even that beautiful and fascinating and newly developing field of archetypal cosmology and astrology, which takes us right back to Pythagoras. And as you alluded to earlier on, that idea that actually the stars and the constellations are all part of this grand cosmic dance of which we're a part. How do we try to discern some of those influences? It all feeds in perfectly. Neoplatonism was kind of almost a kind of neo-depth psychology, compared to Platonism. It was very much more spiritual, but it was also very much more psychological. It was very much about the soul and how we grow the soul.
Yeah, and I think they were quite aware that they weren't so literalist as maybe some of the older traditions. They were quite aware that the myths were myths.
Yeah.
But that they served an important function for people in the society. Yeah.
Of course, and they understood that, the gods, what they thought of as the Greek gods, were simply personifications, which is a perfectly natural process. We are humans. We personify stuff of kind of these energies, these kind of divine energies at work in the wider cosmos. And it's like, okay, we'll call that Zeus, if you like, or we'll call that Athena. We don't think there is actually a goddess, with all this kind of breastplate armor and an owl on her head and what have you. It's not. But that's how our imagination can begin to kickstart itself, so that we find our way into the world of that symbol, of that myth, of that archetype. They were really, it's kind of weird. Everything in a sense that Jung and Hillman did, they'd already done back 2,000 years ago. It just took someone with that, or two people with that great understanding of the zeitgeist and what was required to translate it for a very different world and make sense of it. Now, Hillman was kind of curious because, and it's one thing that, I do have a couple of beefs with Hillman, and this is one of them, that he never got out of psychology. It's just like, that was his safe space. It's like, I know that he understood that the images were separate from us. They weren't part of our psyche. They had a separate life and what have you. But there's this great, I can't remember the name of the article now, but quite late on in his life, he did this talk about how he was really embarrassed, actually, that he'd never brought metaphysics into it, that he'd always avoided metaphysics. And he'd stuck with his comfort zone, which was kind of just like the individual person and the individual person's psychology and individual journey through life. And he hadn't actually gone to the G word, the God word, or the divine, or whatever. It's like, no, I can't quite go there. And it was kind of interesting that he gave that talk, which is published as an essay in one of the volumes of his kind of collected works. So I think what's interesting to me is how we kind of like how we build on Hillman and bring back some of the metaphysics, because people are searching for meaning, and it's not just enough. Your own personal growth, your own personal well-being is just like, it's nice, but it's not what we're here for. We have something else to give. We have a bigger responsibility than just to our own soul's journey. We do have a responsibility to our soul's journey, but we have a responsibility to the greater unfolding and becoming of the world. And that's what I really am interested in bringing back. So we've had, the original, if you like, if I can put it that way, the Neoplatonist, the Platonist and Neoplatonist. We've kind of had it translated for a kind of more individualistic culture by Jung and by Hillman. It's like, okay, how do we add back that kind of cosmological sense of purpose and the unfolding of the universe at large? That sounds really grandiose, but you know what I mean. I'm not being grandiose. It's just there's more to it than just us, Even
if we just start with, 100 kilometer radius around where we live, it's nice to think in cosmological terms, but we have a place in this world, and it's participatory, and our individual soul journey is enmeshed with the world soul.